Stand up.
Well, hello there, my friend. I hope you're doing all right. And, listen, I'm doing pretty good. No big deal. But today my guest is just, two-time Nobel Prize winner in economics. Professor Joseph Stiglitz joins me today to talk about his new book, The Road to Freedom, Economics and the Good Society. Big deal. Big guest. And our conversation begins at 26 minutes in today's show, if you want to skip ahead. But as always, I've got your news recap from Earth 1, so stay tuned for that. But just remember, I can't do it without your subscription. Thank you for anybody who's subscribed recently, everybody who's been subscribed for a long time, and anybody who wants to pay more for this show that hopefully you are getting a lot out of, including this should-be award-winning, comprehensive news recap with headlines and sound here for you every day of the week. Well, almost. Not always on Fridays, but a lot of times on Fridays because one listener named Ryan G. Guilted me into it. And so he has to live with the burden of me doing that much more work on Hangout Night. But I am happy to do it. I love to do it. I know that so many of you get a lot out of it. So thank you, thank you, thank you. If anybody wants to upgrade their subscription, pay more than the minimum entry of $5, you're always welcome to it. Patreon.com/PeteDominic. Thank you ahead of time. All right. Well, that's my live read. It's for the show. This show is supported entirely by subscribers like you. No ads, ad-free, so let's do it. The lead story yesterday is that on the fifth day of Trump's election interference case involving falsified business records to conceal a hush money payment during the 2016 campaign, the prosecution and defense both delivered opening statements. Prosecutors said Donald Trump orchestrated a criminal scheme to corrupt the 2016 presidential election. This case is about criminal conspiracy, prosecutor Matthew Colangelo said. He told the 12-person jury and 6 alternates, I'm sure many of them are going to be used. The disgraced former president Donald Trump, he said, conspired to corrupt the 2016 presidential election by conspiring with his lawyer Michael Cohen and David Pecker, who was the publisher of the National Enquirer at the time. As for what to expect, do prosecutors have a mountain of evidence against the former president? Yes. Does that guarantee a conviction? No, not necessarily. And in keeping with recent events, a New York Times reporter inside the courtroom said Trump was, quote, jolted awake when his defense attorney nudged him during this morning's proceedings. I wonder how closely you're watching the first of Trump's criminal trials, because I'm pretty closely watching it, although I don't think it should be something that we spend a whole lot of time on during our day or in our news broadcast, whether it be the nightly news or your hour-long block on MSNBC or your podcast that has a news segment like this. You mention it and you move on to more important issues potentially impacting a lot more people like this one. I think I just want to let you know that I am keeping my eye on and my ears on the avian bird flu, which is jumped to mammals. Bird flu is infecting more mammals. What does that mean for us? The H5N1 avian flu virus, maybe it's pronounced avian, has killed tens of thousands of marine mammals and infiltrated American livestock for the first time. Scientists are working quickly to assess how it's evolving and how much of a risk it poses to humans. But it's not good. I'm not trying to panic anybody, and I'm going to talk to our epidemiologist friends about it, but not great that it has jumped from poultry to mammals. And that is a much more impactful issue and worth mentioning, of course. President Joe Biden marked yesterday, of course, Earth Day by announcing a $7 billion in federal grants for residential solar projects serving 900,000 plus households in low and middle income communities, which is awesome. He also plans to expand his New Deal style American Climate Corps Green Jobs training program. I highly recommend, if you have a young person in your life that you care about, you tell them about how to apply. Learn how to apply for the American Climate Corps. Really interesting organization, and I'd love if my daughters would do that. I don't think they would or will, but maybe yours will. Maybe that's something that would interest them a lot. And the future of a U.S. air base is now uncertain. More than 1,000 American military personnel will leave the country of Niger in the coming months. The Biden administration official said on Friday, upending U.S. counterterrorism and security policy in the tumultuous Sahel region of Africa. And quite a warning from U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan, who's handed down her harshest January 6th sentence to date, 5.5 years, goes to Scott Miller. You're the big winner, Scott. A Maryland man and former Proud Boys leader who assaulted multiple officers in a violent attempt to breach the Capitol. It can happen again, the Obama-appointed judge, Judge Tanya Chutkan, said. Extremism is alive and well in this country. Threats of violence continue unabated, she said. Also yesterday, the Supreme Court's conservative majority seemed inclined to uphold a series of local ordinances that allowed an Oregon city to ban homeless people from sleeping or camping in public spaces. prices. This is huge and impactful. Again, another story that is that, and that is my editorial mandate here in the news segment, to talk about these stories that impact lots of people and nature, the rest of the living world. The ordinances passed by the grants pass bar sleeping or camping on publicly owned property like sidewalks, streets, bridges, and city parks, imposing fines ranging from $75 to $295. Because, that's what you want to do, is give homeless people a bill for living. 3 homeless people sued the city in 2018, arguing that the laws violated the Eighth Amendment's protections against cruel and unusual punishment because of their status of being involuntarily homeless. The court's 3 liberal justices, meanwhile, appeared concerned about criminalizing homelessness and the most basic of human needs, like sleeping. The Supreme Court also agreed to consider whether the Biden administration can regulate ghost guns, mail-in order kits that allow people to build untraceable guns at home. 2022, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives broadened the definition of firearm in the Gun Control Act of 1968 and issued a federal rule requiring that these kits include serial numbers and mandating background checks for people who buy them from dealers. So maybe look for more guns, homemade ones, legally on the streets and homes across America. Keeps getting better and better with the guns. I think I want that bird flu to jump. I'm kidding. I'm not that cynical and dire, folks. No. Why could I be with a headline like this from Asia? A heat wave has scorched millions across the continent, with temperatures reaching nearly 110 degrees Fahrenheit in parts of India and Bangladesh. The National Labor Relations Board is now weighing whether certain student athletes should be considered employees. It's an interesting story to watch. The top U.S. drug official called for an inquiry into how anti-doping authorities decided to somehow clear 23 elite Chinese swimmers who tested positive for a banned drug. This is a really important headline. At least 24 states now have introduced bills to combat AI-generated sexually explicit images known as deep fakes of people under the age of 18. And the FTC sued to block an $8.5 billion merger that would bring together Coach, Kate Spade, Michael Kors, and Versace fashion companies. And finally, pro-Palestinian protests are disrupting college campuses across the country. At Columbia University, classes were held remotely yesterday after pro-Palestinian demonstrations on and around campus left some Jewish students fearing for their safety. At Yale University, police arrested at least 47 protesters who had defied orders to leave an encampment. At NYU University, students refused the university's demand to leave a campus plaza. Demonstrations were reported at MIT, Michigan, Tufts, and other campuses as well. Harvard leaders planned for Harvard Yard to be closed for most of the week. Administrators at some schools tried to defuse the protests while balancing free speech rights and the fears of many Jewish students who said some of the demonstrations had veered into anti-Semitism. And in news from the conflict in Israel and Gaza, I don't know why I call it the conflict, the absolute massacre of women and children, Palestinian women and children. Well, the head of intelligence for Israel's military resigned yesterday following the intelligence failures that preceded the Hamas-led attacks on Israel on October 7th. Now, if only we can get the prime minister to follow suit. Okay, those are your headlines for today. And if you're listening, that would be Tuesday, the 23rd of April. Now, let's get to some of the audio I've gathered for you. Okay, let's start with some analysis and commentary on day 5 of the Trump hush money trial, and let's start with the worst, most putrid analysis, and then we'll get smarter and better as we go. First, it's then Jesse Waters, who's just an awful and stupid person and just keep falling on his face and getting promoted. Here he is talking about case against the disgraced former president as pure evil. Then he compared the treatment of the disgraced former president to Gitmo detainees and told Fox News viewers the best way to kill the former president. All those high-rise buildings around the courthouse.
Okay, Jesse, let me start with you. The prosecution says this is election fraud, and they say pure and simple. Is it?
I call it pure evil. So they've taken away his freedom of speech, and now they've taken away his freedom of movement. So he has to sit there all week for 6 weeks, and if he says anything, they'll throw him in jail. If he leaves, they throw him in jail. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had more allowances for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I think they bought $1 million soccer field for the people in Gitmo. I don't know if Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was able to visit his son for his high school graduation, but it's similar. They're freezing him to death. They're putting him in a meat locker. He says it's like 45 degrees in there. And they're putting his life in danger. And they're telling the entire world, all the wackos, this is where the former president's going to be at this date, at this time. surrounded by high-rise buildings.
Okay, well, just telling Fox viewers exactly what they need to know. Okay, now moving on to some more commentary. This is Rachel Maddow, who was apparently inside the courtroom at one point, and she described the disgraced former president in quite unflattering terms.
From where I was sitting, he seemed basically inert. He kind of slumped his shoulders and was I'm a slump-shouldered person. He was kind of slump-shouldered like this when he came in and while he was sitting there. At times when Mr. Pecker was testifying, I noted that he was kind of leaning heavily on the desk. There were times when he leaned from one side to the other, but I just didn't see him as particularly animated. Again, I may not have been in the best position to observe that closely. I've seen him in person in my life a few times. I would say seeing him go up and down the aisle. I was sitting on the aisle and seeing him walk right past me in the aisle, in and out of the courtroom several times, including the recess. I would say that he seems thinner than I have seen him in the past. He seems considerably older, and he seems annoyed, resigned, maybe angry. He seems like a man who's miserable to be here. And that's, I'm no body language expert, and this is just my observation, but he seemed old and tired and mad.
When he came out.
I probably would seem that way, too, if I was looking at this kind of a proceeding.
All right, Rachel Maddow on MSNBC yesterday. They're doing wall-to-wall coverage. I think it's way too much. Maybe not. I don't know. What do you think? Here is, over on CNN, Kristen Holmes, who is a legal analyst, fact-checking a key part of former President Donald Trump's the disgraced former president's post-trial rant yesterday, poured cold water on the idea that his campaign schedule has been dramatically altered by him needing to be in court.
Well, look, just to be clear, Donald Trump, even on a good week, is not campaigning more than 2 days. We have not seen that since the primary. Even during that cycle, he occasionally had several events, but it was very rare. So that is not really impacting the schedule. But I will tell you, talking to senior advisors, particularly now that it's dawned on them that they are resigned to the fact he is in this courtroom nonstop for 4 days a week, there is a little bit of concern. We have seen Donald Trump utilizing the cameras, but when I talk to senior advisors, they're just not sure that that's going to be enough. Now, we saw him and his team celebrating after he had this politically motivated stop at a Harlem bodega last week, but then they were dealt a blow when he was supposed to appear in North Carolina for a rally that was then canceled for weather, because there's not a lot of wiggle room here. There are only 2 real days that he can do any sort of campaigning, any sort of fundraising right now. So we talk to various advisors. They tell us 2 things. One, you have the people who continue to insist that this is going to be good for him, that this is going to help with fundraising like we saw during primary season, is going to help secure voters. But there are others who really aren't so sure. They know that we are in uncharted territory. They're not entirely sure how this is going to be managed on the campaign trail and whether or not this could actually sway voters towards Donald Trump or away from Donald Trump. That's a big question for them. So right now you're seeing his team really huddling together, trying to figure out how exactly they are going to manage this schedule, looking at possible events within the New York area. But of course, no area in New York that would possibly be more popular for Donald Trump or more conducive to having Donald Trump there, like Staten Island, for example. But now they're really trying to come up with those ideas that they hadn't really gone through before.
All right. Well, does it help him or hurt him or somewhere in between to be in court on trial and have us all talking about it every day? I think it can't help him in my mind. But what do you think? All right, let's go to some more legal analysis and back to MSNBC, where my old friend Danny Savalas claimed that yesterday there was a decent chance former President Donald Trump would actually testify in this hush money trial because he believes he's smarter than anyone in the room.
When we're talking about the possibility of Donald Trump testifying, he has said in the past, just recently, that he wanted to testify. And today they talked about that possibility and what that would mean for the case. What's any positive aspect for Trump to testify?
For centuries now, criminal defense attorneys have always been risk averse, and ordinarily it is just too risky to put your client on the stand. They never know as much as the prosecutors, and there are tons of bad things that can happen. After all, once the jury loses faith in a particular witness, including your client, and they don't believe him, then you're pretty much sunk. But I happen to think, and I'm sure I'm in the minority, there is a decent chance that Donald Trump will testify.
Really?
Number one, yes, he believes he is smarter than anyone in the room. Number two, criminal defense attorneys will tell you that their clients in white-collar cases, I don't know why, but very particular to white-collar cases, they believe they have an explanation for absolutely everything. They believe the prosecution is a big misunderstanding, and if they can just take the stand, they can clear up all of the misunderstanding. It is a dangerous way of thinking, and arguably it's a way of thinking that made them white-collar criminal defendants in the first place.
Yes, hubris. It'll always get you in the end, fellas. All right. Well, anytime there is a clip, moving on from that, there's a clip from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Anytime I see her anywhere talking, I always want to share it with you at least a little bit. Here she is on CNN yesterday talking about her good friend Marjorie Taylor Greene. Take it away, Congresswoman.
But Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that we need to fund the border, well, she needs to go talk to her master, a.k.a. Donald Trump, who specifically said, do not go through with the border bill. And that's the only reason they don't have anything. So if she has a problem, she needs to go talk to Donald instead of blaming her speaker. And also,
there you have it. Ooh, is she good? All right. Let's now listen to some of those arguments being made yesterday at the Supreme Court about this case on homelessness. Here's Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Here's what that sounded like.
Assuming it's fair, it prohibits you criminalizing homelessness, right? So what you do is say only homeless people who sleep outdoors will be arrested. That's the testimony of your chief of police, two or three officers, which is if you read the crime, it's only stopping you from sleeping in public for the purpose of maintaining a temporary place to live. And the police officers testified that means that if a stargazer wants to take a blanket or a sleeping bag out at night to watch the stars and falls asleep, you don't arrest them. You don't arrest babies who have blankets over them. You don't arrest people who are sleeping on the beach, as I tend to do if I've been there a while. You only arrest people who don't have a second home. Is that correct?
Well,
who don't have a home.
So, no, these laws are generally applicable. They apply to everyone.
That's what you want to say. Give me one example, because your police officers couldn't. And they explicitly said, if someone has a home, and is out there and happens to fall asleep, they won't be arrested. Fall asleep with something on them.
Well, Joint Appendix, page 98, is one example of a citation issued to a person with a home address. But more importantly, I think what we're getting at here is that these laws regulate conduct of everyone. There's nothing in the law that criminalizes homelessness.
That's what you say, but if I look at the record and see differently.
Yes, exactly. They're criminalizing not having a house in America. Absolutely insane. That was the lawyer from that city in Oregon. Grants Pass is the name of it. She's the attorney on why the city of Grants Pass wants to criminalize penalties for homeless encampments. And now here's another opinion, a little bit shorter. This is a minute 16 of Justice Samuel Alito posing a hypothetical in case over whether law enforcement can issue criminal penalties for people who sleep outside when there are shelter beds available.
So what if the person says, I know there's a bed available at the Gospel Rescue Mission, but they won't take my dog.
Yeah, I don't think the inability to take your dog to the shelter is a sufficient reason. There are shelters in some larger cities that may well take pets. But
I know I could sleep in the home of a family member, but they really hate me and they're really nasty to me. I'm not. These are. I'm just wondering how this is going to be administered on a daily basis.
And I think, with all respect, I think that example is if the family is going to accept him. But that's the question, whether there is a place to sleep. And I don't know that it would very often come down to that family hates me. On the other hand, if it's a woman who left domestic abuse, she couldn't be expected to go back to her her home or maybe her relative's home or his relative's home or something. So there's a lot of common sense. And again, the law enforcement, the first encounter that a police officer or somebody else has with a homeless person is very unlikely to be a situation in which the person would be issued a citation.
All right, there you go. That is the U.S. Deputy Solicitor General, should have said that. Edwin Needler is his name, arguing with Justice Alito, who probably hates homeless people. And now here is our president, Joe Biden, announcing that he will expand, yesterday on Earth Day, the American Climate Corps Green Jobs Training Program and offer nearly 2,000 positions across 36 states. Get after it, folks.
I will put tens of thousands of young people to work at the forefront of our climate resilience and energy future, clean energy future. Today, I'm proud to announce that Americans across the country can now apply, to become the first members of the American Climate Corps. We're recruiting for over 2,000 positions in 36 states to start with in Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, with many on the way. Just go to Climate Corps, as mentioned already, climatecorps.gov to apply. You'll get paid to fight climate change, learning how to install those solar panels, fight wildfires, rebuild wetlands, weatherize homes, and so much more that's going to protect the environment and build a clean energy economy.
There you go. I love it. Love that announcement from the president yesterday on Earth Day. Joining him was Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who said the president is overseeing the single biggest federal investment in tackling the climate crisis in our nation's history. And a lot of it is because congresswomen like her, who were elected by grassroots activists that cared about this issue and forced him to get moving on it and helped him get elected.
It is no accident that this president is overseeing the single biggest federal investment in tackling the climate crisis in our nation's history. Over just the past few months, President Biden has paused new natural gas exports, vastly expanded the conservation of our public lands in Alaska, and he has overseen tens of billions of dollars in climate investments across the United States. Today also serves as a reminder of the power of organizing, of what we can accomplish when young people, climate advocates, labor organizers, and working people of all backgrounds come together to demand the future we all deserve.
All right, there you go. Those are your news clips. I always like to end on some comedy, and I love Trey Crowder of the Liberal Rednecks, very funny comedian. He's been on the show several times, good friend of mine. Here he is with another amazing rant, almost 3 minutes here, on trying to find a jury for Trump and a straitjacket for Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I have no idea why he bleeped out the shit and other curses on this, but it was the only version I could find, and I still think it's worth it.
Hey, y'all, a couple things going on right now. The big hush money trial has commenced. Side note, hush money, getting paid to not talk. I've always wanted to get paid to not do a job. I think I could really excel at a gig like that. You can ask my wife. She'll tell you I'm a generational prospect at not doing shit, y'all. Somebody needs to sign me up. But either way, the trial has started. They're having trouble finding jurors who can be impartial to Donald Trump. Yeah, no shit. It's like being impartial to a tornado. Anybody whose brain works is terrified of the damage it can cause, but you have a rabid contingent of lunatic cultists who think it's the coolest thing in the world. I assume it's because those people get a boner from chaos and destruction, but either way, no one is lukewarm on either tornadoes or Donald Trump. So what are they going to do for the jury? Well, you've got Republican pundits out here publicly telling Trumpers in New York that they should Trojan horse their way onto the jury and blow it all up from the inside, a move they say would be patriotic and correct people say would be a felony. So what are they going to do for the jury? Does New York have enough people who just woke up from an 8+ year coma to fill out a jury? Imagine you wake up from a coma, you get called to the court, and you're like, what, The Apprentice guy? No, I never really watched it. Wow, what happened? Well, they filled a whole jury with coma patients. Imagine their faces during this trial. They're sitting over there like, Hold on. I'm sorry. Can you back up a little bit? What? I think it'd be a stark reminder of how crazy things have gotten, y'all. Speaking of which, Donald Trump is reportedly having trouble staying awake during these proceedings, which means right now in the upcoming presidential election, there's an ongoing screaming match where one side is like, your guy can't even stay awake in the Oval Office, and the other side accurately responds, yeah, well, your guy can't even stay awake in his criminal trial, and somehow that doesn't immediately end the debate right there. Verily, we are lost. Speaking of being lost, the House GOP continues to self-immolate. Yeah, you know how like a toddler will pull a whole basket of laundry on their head and then scream at all the adults in the room for allowing them to do that to themselves? Yeah, that's the House GOP right now. Particularly, who else? Marjorie Taylor Greene, the answer to the age-old question, what would happen if we taught a Neanderthal Pilates? She's once again making demands while holding a gun to her own party's head. That's right, she's threatening to oust Speaker Johnson, and now she has support in the form of Kentucky Rep. Thomas Massey, which means that MAGA Mike will require the help of Democrats to save his job. Well, with friends like these. Am I right, Mikey? Yes, these people are once again drowning in a puddle of their own crazy juice, and it's up to the Dems to throw them a lifeline. Or, if I could offer an alternative, they could opt instead to point and laugh. Yes, I'd say let these people remind the American public in an election year just how woefully incapable they are of governing. And I don't know how it's going to end up. Some people think with Speaker Jeffries, I'll believe that when I see it, but I'll say this. If MTG's incalcitrant mania somehow results in the Republicans holding the House but losing the speakership, that would unironically be the greatest thing she's ever accomplished for this country.
Yeah, Trey Crowder, everybody. I love it. Love it. All right. Well, there you go. That is the news recap from Earth One. I hope you liked it. And if you did, tell your friends. The best daily news recap is right here on Stand Up, produced by me. There you go. All right. Now joining me, we've got a great guest, as we do every day. He's a two-time Nobel Prize winning economist. No big deal. He's a professor of economics at Ivy League's Columbia University, the recipient of a whole bunch of other awards like the John Bates Clark Medal. I've got the honorable mention for that once. He's also the former senior vice president and chief economist of the World Bank. He's written so many really good books I've interviewed him for over the years, including The Great Divide and Free Fall and The Price of Inequality. His new book is The Road to Freedom, Economics and the Good Society. In The Road to Freedom, Professor Stiglitz dissects America's current economic system and the political ideology that created it, laying bare their twinned failure. Free and unfettered markets have only succeeded in delivering a series of crises: the financial crisis, the opioid crisis, and the crisis of inequality. While a small portion of the population has amassed considerable wealth, wages for most people have stagnated. Free and unfettered markets have exploited consumers, workers, and the environment alike. Such failures have fed populist movements that believe being free means abandoning any obligations citizens have to one another. As they grow in strength, these movements now pose a real threat to true economic and political freedom. The Road to Freedom breaks new ground, showing how economics, including recent advances in which Professor Stiglitz has played major important roles, reframes how to think about freedom and the role of the state in 21st century society. I loved this conversation. I always learn a lot. It was an honor to have him. I hope you'll go hit him up on Twitter and get the book. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Joseph Stiglitz is back. Let's do it. Oh my gosh, look who we have. One of the all-time greatest economists. It's been way too long since I had the privilege of talking to him, but he has a great and super important new book. Very excited to talk to you, sir. Professor Joseph Stiglitz, welcome back, sir.
Nice to be here again.
So happy to talk to you. And the new book is really important. You've done it all in your world, all of it, government, academia. Obviously, you've authored many really important books. Why this book? Why now?
We are at a particular moment where our society is very conflicted. The title of the book is The Road to Freedom, Economics and the Good Society. And there are so many issues where freedom of one individual or one group comes into conflict with that of others. And we have to have a framework for thinking about it. One of the examples that motivated this was during the pandemic, and some argued that they didn't want to be masked or have a vaccination, saying that would interfere with their freedom. But at the other side of that is that their freedom not to wear a mask, their freedom not to get vaccinated, risked somebody's freedom to live. Society has to adjudicate, has to make judgments between those two freedoms. Some cases, those judgments are easy. Some cases, those are hard. But there are many cases where even a little bit of compulsion can expand meaningful freedoms for almost everybody. So what I was worried me is that we've had a too constricted view of what we mean by freedom, and I'm trying to look at this through the lens of an economist.
And you do, and we're going to get into all of that, what freedom means and some more examples. But as soon as I found out you were writing this new book and I knew I wanted to talk to you, I always want to talk to you about everything. I knew the first question I wanted to ask you is, do you think that you've been given the credit that you deserve based on what you, as an economist, predicted what would happen if certain policies were put in place? The first time I ever talked to you was around, I believe, a book that you co-wrote called The $3 Trillion War, The True Costs of the Iraq Conflict. I also know that you've advised a number of presidents and different policies, and often they didn't take your advice. And I wonder how you feel, given your prescriptions over your career and your lifetime, and having been right so often, if you've been given the credit you deserve. Specifically, I would start with what you predicted about the Iraq War. I think you underestimated its total cost when you first wrote that book, potentially.
We knew we were underestimating, but I think we underestimated the amount by which we underestimated it.
Yeah.
The war turned out, we thought it was 3 to 5 trillion. The cost of taking care of the injured, the disabled, healthcare costs, disability payments, that itself is well over $1 trillion. It was a very costly war. Remember that when we went into the war, the numbers the administration gave were something like $160 billion. They were off by 20-fold. They were trying to hide the true cost. But as you say, there are many other examples. I warned about how the financial sector deregulation.
Well, that was my next question. Let's fast forward to whatever year you warned about that. And there were several. By the way, people always say, and this must really drive you nuts, that economists didn't predict the financial crisis. Rather, what we hear so often about the financial crisis of 2008, I want to call it, is that nobody saw this coming. And I remember just hosting my show, talking to a whole bunch of people who saw this coming. You were one of them. So go ahead, sir. And
that was exactly the point. I had been worried from the time I was in the Clinton administration, where there was a push for financial sector deregulation. I was worried what the consequences would be. And unfortunately, my predictions came true. I saw it coming ever more clearly in the half decade before 2008, in the 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, and it just got worse and worse. And people like Ben Bernanke and Alan Greenspan just turned a blind eye to what I thought was obvious by that point. There's another example. I don't want to get ahead of you, but the other example is there's a lot of discussion right now about globalization and what it's doing. And there's a withdrawal from the globalization. We saw during the pandemic that globalization had resulted in our becoming not resilient.
Yeah, what's wrong with turning inwards and producing everything you need at home? And by the way, you could never get ahead of me. You're an Ivy League Nobel Prize winning economist, and I, sir, have an associate's degree in liberal arts and spent most of my career as a stand-up comedian. So don't you get too carried away, sir. But when the argument that a lot of people make, certainly I think on the right, increasingly, I don't think they used to make this. The economists that you study and criticize, Friedman and Hayek and so on, were for free trade everywhere, no rules. But now it would seem that the MAGA idea is America first. Let's produce it all here at home. There's an argument for that because we need antibiotics to be produced here at home. We need microchips and semiconductors to be produced here at home. So what's wrong with producing your own stuff, sir?
So I've always tried to get a balance between these two extremes. And when the ideas of Friedman and Hayek were prevalent, Bush and the right, those Republicans said, let it rip. Free markets, I was worried about deindustrialization, about resilience, about the difficulty of adjusting to this new world. But now we've gone to the other extreme. There are benefits from trade. Trading with somebody who can do something better than you, comparative advantage. It's trying to get that balance, which is so difficult. And the sad fact is that the Republicans have swung from one extreme, let markets rip, to let's really take a heavy thumb and do everything at home. Both of those impose enormous costs. One episodically, one we're going to be seeing going forward.
I feel like you were saying what you're warning about with this turning inward and this anti-globalization, what could happen, and I might have interrupted you. What are you seeing happening or predicting could happen if this trend continues?
What I thought was that the extreme of neoliberalism, the free trade, would leave too many people behind. And that would create a fertile field for populists, for demagogues. And that in turn,
you're right,
would undermine our democracy, would lead to nationalism. And it's one thing to be somewhat self-reliant, to be able to make the mask that you need in the middle of a pandemic. It's a little bit of minimal thing of capacity at home. It's another thing to not realize that we share a planet, and we share a planet. We have to deal with climate change together. There are pandemics. Those viruses don't carry passports. They don't ask whether they can go across boundaries. So we really have to cooperate. And wars can spread very quickly across boundaries. So we have to work together for peace. The idea that we can go it alone is just so wrong. And nationalism is so dangerous.
When we talk about going it alone, and we specifically look at America, and I promise you I'm getting into all the freedoms that you write and explain to us, but it must be said, we must talk about the role of immigration and specifically as laborers, as the work that they do. We want to rely solely on ourselves, America first, but we also want to close the door to immigrants. And there's been case study and example after example of what happens in a state or county or in an industry when you crack down on immigrant labor to that industry, to that local or state economy. What would you want to add about the mix of America first, but no new people? Especially those ones that do those jobs.
Well, if you reflect back on America's own history, we are a country of immigrants. We all came here, some in the last couple of years, some 50 years ago, some 100, some 300 years ago, but we're all immigrants. And we bring different skills, capacities. New immigrants often come with an enormous amount of energy.
And I think, sorry, I just want to add to energy, work ethic, desire to work, humility. And when you think about Americans that have been here generation after generation, I don't know if I want to use an example, but the best one would be, say, how do I say this? My kids, people who have so much privilege, generational wealth that they don't have to work in a chicken chopping factory. So you said energy, and I just want to add work ethic, humility, and perspective. And I think those are economic terms for sure, at some extent. I don't know what you would...
No, I agree with you. I was trying to shorthand that, but you're absolutely right. And every day we don't realize when we go into our grocery store and we get California avocados or California asparagus or
raspberries, sir, all the time. Every day I buy raspberries and blueberries, and then I go on and try to support the migrant farm workers who are picking those berries at rates of speed that if I spent 1 hour doing that, I would keel over. And I'm in good shape.
Exactly. So we should be thankful for the immigrants. In New York, you go into every shop, every restaurant. We couldn't survive without our immigrants.
Right. That's the point I'm making. So they want to close the door on those people that do. I think they're, quote, essential workers, we learned.
Yeah, they are. And at the other end, we don't often realize we're talking to each other over one of several different format media. Enormous number of startups. About half of them have been by immigrants. So all the technology, the high technology.
No, I'm fine with those people. I'm fine with the highly skilled laborers, sir. It's the ones that are easier to demonize doing the blue collar work and the farm labor and those people I'm not okay with.
We really need them if we're going to survive. They're all part of the mix.
It seems like there's no special interest, by the way, that's anti-immigration, because even the most right-wing capitalist special interests realize very much how dependent they are on those laborers specifically. Is that fair to say? The only reason to be against it is like racism and xenophobia, because the Chamber of Commerce, much less even most religious houses of worship, are very welcoming to big lobbies, agriculture, and more are very welcoming to these people. So there really isn't a special interest, unlike everything else that you work on and think about. Lobbying against immigration, it's just a way to get elected to demonize people.
It's part of demonization, and that comes, I think, understandably in some sense, from our failure to address the growing inequality.
Right.
And the fact that most of which has to do, by the way, with the nature of technical change, which has replaced labor in many areas.
Never gets said. You, of course, wrote The Price of Inequality. How many years ago? I always think of
2012, 12 years ago.
When I think of that word, I actually think of that book because it sits prominently on my bookcase along with the rest of your work. And so if anybody wants to understand exactly what you just said, it's so right. We never think about those folks losing their jobs, and more likely more and more higher skilled, affluent folks. Again, back to my daughters. My daughter wants to maybe be a screenwriter. Guess what? AI is going to write everything. Let's be honest. Whatever those jobs are, they get replaced by technology.
I feel confident your daughter will do a better job than ChatGPT.
You're not. No, she's not great. I should be honest. She's not that. She's amazing. Obviously, I'm joking. Yes, I hope you're right. But the point you're making is about technology, not other more traditional ways of replacing jobs. Let's talk about the book more specifically, The Road to Freedom, Economics and the Good Society. I was trying to explain to a friend of mine why I care so much about economics, and it's because my brother was very much into it growing up, but he was into it because he thought a lot about fairness. When I think about economics, I ask people, what do you think about how an economy should run? Because I feel like it's a good way to get to know someone's values and morals. So dumb it down here in terms of why all of what you're writing about in this book in terms of our freedom matter and have always mattered to your work specifically when it comes to inequality and fairness and a sense of moral values, winners and losers, which are always going to be, I think, in place.
So I begin the book by actually trying to conceptualize what do we mean by freedom, and through a lens of an economist, and it's freedom to do things. If you're at the point of starvation, you have no freedom. You do what you have to do to survive. That means the way to think of freedom is your opportunity set, what it is that you can do. And on the one hand, if you enhance somebody's income, if you increase the incomes through growth, you can enrich what people can do. On the other hand, one person can impose harms on another, and that's constricting what they can do. I gave the example of somebody not wearing a mask or vaccine and giving COVID-19 to somebody else. That's an extreme case of taking away somebody's freedom because they have to go to a hospital, or they may even lose the most important freedom to live. That's an example where one person's freedom takes away that of another.
So when it comes to all of these issues, you went right to food and Maslow's hierarchy. But when I think about America and economics and freedom, and you've obviously written and talked about this all the time, and I think about healthcare. I think about how everything can change. I had a corporate media job with the best healthcare for years. My wife at the time was an independent contractor. When I lost that job, I lost my health insurance and wasn't as worried for the moment because my family was healthy. Then my daughter gets diagnosed with scoliosis and she has to have expensive treatments and a back brace and huge costs for the first time that would have been covered. The whole time I had that dream job, Professor Stiglitz, all my nightmare was that if I lost it, I would lose my insurance. I could find another job. I can find work. I can work hard, but how will I ever afford insurance? Luckily, Obamacare created exchanges that make it a lot more affordable for someone like me, but still, it is a goddamn nightmare and a travesty and a morally reprehensible state that America finds itself uniquely in. How much of the freedom you talk about has to do with the cost of health insurance, much less access, quality, and affordability of health care?
You're absolutely right. And that's a good example of how you can lose your freedom. In a sense, many dimensions to what you talked about. One of the things I talked about is freedom from fear. Even when you had a health insurance, you were worried about losing that health insurance if you lost your job. that casts a pallor over everybody in our country. So even people who have the insurance always worry about losing that insurance. One of the striking things about America is how many people wind up in bankruptcy. Can you imagine that? Bankruptcy where they lose all their assets. You know what it takes? Everybody is one illness away from bankruptcy if they don't have insurance. And you can think of yourself as being 2 steps away from bankruptcy. You lose your job. That means you lose your health insurance. And then somebody gets sick. You're in bankruptcy. So that is the nature of the loss of freedom that is an essential part of where we in the United States are today. And that illustrates an important theme in my book. A little coercion, making everybody pay a little bit of taxes, can make all of us freer, because then we can have the security of the freedom of fear from these disastrous events. We can be freedom. We can have government making sure we have stoplights so we don't have gridlock, so we can move on our roads. We can build the roads that enable us to go from one city to another.
Public education.
And public education. Absolutely.
Which has been under attack my whole life and probably a lot of yours.
Absolutely. And I said freedom is about freedom to do. An important part of freedom for everybody is live up to their potential, to flourish, to be creative, to do what you can't do that if you don't get the net education is appropriate to your skills.
The problem I've always seen is, as long as I've been in this game, and I'll call my job watching and listening to people complaining about everything and trying to find solutions and talking to experts to help explain the way forward. And I've always seen, when it comes to politics in America, certainly it would seem since Reagan, this idea, and it may be the most effective messaging in the history of America, certainly when it comes to politics and government, that government isn't the solution. Government is the problem. Demonizing just the idea, the entity of government, leads people to saying things like, when you say, if we could coerce people to pay a little bit more in the taxes, and you're being very kind because there's a lot of people who pay nothing and they're often the wealthiest, if we can coerce them, but what they hear is, you want to confiscate my money. The government wants to confiscate, steal my money. The way that they speak and think on the right predominantly is so much different than the way that you speak and think. And in your new book, you try to get to the political, economic, and social systems and define them that would be most likely to provide the outcomes that you have always prescribed, and, if you will, a societal well-being, how we could all maybe agree on what that might look like. You can look at other nations if you want, but also to deliver all these freedoms to, as you say, the largest number of citizens, which sounds to some people like some form of left-wing communism or Marxism or something like that. And I've always felt, when it comes to time to talk about economics, we just need new language that doesn't set people off. What do you mean when you talk about creating these new political, economic, and social systems that would benefit and provide the most freedom for the largest number of citizens? Because I know you're not prescribing any of those economic systems.
So let me maybe step back a point of the economic system that we have that began, we would say, with Reagan back in 1980. It was called neoliberalism. Neo meant new, liberalism meant freeing, deregulating, lowering taxes, especially on the rich. That was supposed to free up the economy, free enterprise, and that was supposed to grow the economy, and the benefits would then trickle down to everybody, and everybody would be better off. Now, the reality is of that 40-year experiment is that growth was reduced by 2/3, and there was no trickle down. In fact, it was trickle up. Disparities grew, and people at the bottom actually got worse off. So it didn't work out. Now, the form of, I still believe in capitalism or a market economy, decentralization, that you have a successful economy has to have lots of different things going on, enterprises, NGOs, co-ops, private enterprises, but the putting large corporations on a pedestal and saying they can do whatever they want is been a failure, and actually takes away the freedom of most citizens.
The problem is it doesn't take away the freedom of all citizens. It's almost like, I always think about the healthcare argument, and what I've always thought is, those of us who are healthy and haven't needed access our health care and our insurance, and even those of us who have good plans, don't realize how broken it is. The people at the top or towards the top absolutely do benefit. The healthy people, the fortunate, the privileged, we benefit a great deal. It's not as if you're saying some people don't, and I don't want that to get lost. A lot of people do benefit, just not most people.
There are 2 points here I'd make. First, all of us eventually get old.
Is that right? You haven't seemed to.
But at least, let me put it, most of us eventually get old. And as we get old, we get more frail. And so the reality is, whether you're healthy or not, is partially a matter of luck and partially a matter of aging. And the fact that many young people say, oh, I don't want to be taxed, I don't need it. The fact is, they're going to be old and they're going to need it. Now, of course, there are a few people, the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies, they like the system. I don't make any bones about the fact that they're not going to be as happy with the kind of regime that I've been advocating.
No, we see what happens when the pushback occurs and when it gets mainstreamed and when it gets proposed. We see exactly what happens, and it usually doesn't work out well for most of us. I don't know if you want to look at Obamacare or the bank deregulation and re-regulation, the Consumer Protection, Financial Protection Bureau, and all of those things that were put in place. You see the pushback from lobbyists and from moneyed interests, people who would lose. You don't have to make the case. You can just open a newspaper or talk to somebody in government and ask who they're talking to all day.
Absolutely. We should be thankful we're still a democracy, and we have the power to push back against that pushback. But I think we need to think more deeply about it, and that's, again, one of the reasons I wrote the book. The fact is that a society with as much ingrained inequality as we have is going to give inevitably too much power, political power, to those with a lot of wealth. Economic inequality translates into political inequality. And that's particularly true if we don't address some of the real sources of power, corporate power in the United States. And one of the good things about what Biden is doing now is trying to crack down on some of these enormous agglomeration of power. It happened at the end of the 19th century, and then we forgot about it in the middle of the 20th, the end of the 20th century. And now we're back with some real behemoths, and we really need to.
Yeah, no, in a lot of ways. You never forgot about it, which is why you're an American treasure. I've always listened to you and read you and had you on a pedestal, sir. I don't know what your weaknesses are. I'll find them and I'll try to exploit them at some point, but time is running out because you've always been impressive. But the problem I see is that the people who need to listen to you and trust you the most don't. How does an academic and an economist like you communicate to those who most would, I would argue, benefit from your prescriptions and ideas and economic policies, but they don't hear them or they don't trust them because they're listening to, when it comes to economics, Rush Limbaugh or their favorite talker, which is he's delivering a much different, easier to digest idea than your egg-headed policy ideas that actually work when played out?
Well, part of the answer to that is that I write books like The Road to Freedom.
I know, but you're not on. All I'm saying is it would be great if you were on Fox News tonight. It would be great. I would love to. And I'm guessing that during this round of interviews or any others, you don't get invited to a lot of these conservative right-wing shows.
Yeah, I used to get invited more, but the country's gotten more polarized, quite frankly. I used to get invited maybe 10 years ago, but as the country's got more polarized, the flow of those invitations has gotten slower. And I think that's part of the danger of where America's polarization has taken it. And that in turn goes back to the theme that I mentioned earlier. A society with a huge wealth inequality winds up living in different worlds. And then you have the populists, the demagogues, willing to exploit this and dividing us even further.
Is there anything that we can do to get this book in the hands of those people or to communicate your ideas, I don't know, more to them? Do you think about that at all? Because I always feel like we're on Earth 1 and Earth 2, and on your Earth, your predictions have been so accurate through your whole career. If only we'd listened to Stiglitz and my friend Jeff Sachs about a lot of things and so many other progressive economists, if you will, things would be so much better for so many more people. And I just feel like they're never going to hear us.
I hope the title of my book will entice many of them. Yeah,
that's a good point.
Because the right has taken freedom as almost their own trademark.
Exactly. Great
they've
point.
Tried to patent it. And part of the reason I wrote this book is to say, really, they haven't really thought through what freedom means. So I hope the title entices them, and I hope if they listen to the argument, read the arguments, they may be persuaded.
If only you would put in the word liberty more in the title, that they love liberty and freedom more. Like somehow the right or the left somehow was more appreciative of liberty and freedom has always been like a joke in my stand-up act. Like how ridiculous that we use these words. Okay, we're talking on Earth Day, and my final question is about going back to those freedoms and thinking about, obviously, climate. You write in the book that climate change is a perfect example why we need to give up some freedoms, like the freedom to pollute and litter and burn anything we want, to preserve others, the freedom to survive on this planet and still cohabitate. Why do people, the people leading the most damaging, polluting industries, why are they so resistant to recognizing the pathway forward? It seemed to me the answer is quarterly capitalism, because their salaries benefit on the next quarter of their publicly traded stock or something like that. They don't think about their kids, or they're just, I don't know, it's a cognitive dissonance. Using climate as the example, what would you say?
Oh, you're absolutely right. The answer I was going to give before you gave the answer was greed. But short-sightedness is really a better way of looking at it, because it's not even in their own self-interest. If they care about their children, if they care about their grandchildren, this world won't be inhabitable, or they'll have to spend an enormous amount of money to make it inhabitable. So their children's freedom is being reduced, and their grandchildren's freedom is being reduced. So if they only took a minute to realize the consequences, and this is a consensus among the entire scientific community. There's no conspiracy here.
It's a consensus among more of a convincingly now. The entire housing insurance homeowner policy industry in a state like Florida or California, like they're not hedging. They know exactly what is happening because it's not something in the future. Homes are burning up and being flooded right now from drought, hurricanes, and wildfires. So forget about scientists. Isn't the homeowners insurance industry pretty concerned about climate, especially in states like those?
Oh, very much. Florida, large parts of Florida are going to be underwater. If you have some real estate on the coast, forget about it. So it's the word that you talked about was short-sightedness. It is a real example of how modern capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, has wound up being short-sighted capitalism, and that a move to a more progressive form of capitalism would entail investment in our future. Realization, working together, we can create that future.
So short-sighted that often, correct me if I'm wrong, the boards of companies and the executives are looking at the next quarter. And even if their moves today end the bank or the company in 5 years, and even if they know that, they know they can boost the stock in the next quarter. They know they get their bonuses based on that. So it's just antithetical to their own company, much less their entire industry, but it benefits them individually. Do I have that right in terms of the short-sightedness?
Right.
Okay. I'm glad that I really just baited you to tell me I was correct, because it makes me feel smarter. And I can't thank you enough for joining me. The new book is so good, as is all of your work. It's a privilege to talk to you again. The Road to Freedom, Economics, and the Good Society. So you're going on your book tour now. You're going to be interviewing a lot of people. So I know it's going to be hard to struggle with knowing that you peaked today with me. This was the best. Okay. It won't get any better, sir. I just want you to know this was the best interview, and I appreciate you acknowledging that.
Thank you. It's really been good.
No, I'm really looking forward to your talk with Tim Noah. He's a real smart guy too. Congratulations, good luck, and thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, there you go. How about it? The Road to Freedom, Economics and the Good Society. Get the book, get all of his books. They're really easy to read, and I love talking with him and learning from him. He's pretty much always been right. I hope you'll go to tweet him and let him know you heard him here on the show. Thank you for listening very, very much. Go subscribe, go write a review on iTunes or Spotify. Hit me up on all the social medias, from the Threads to the Instagram to the TikTok to the YouTube to all of the rest. You can listen to the show every day on YouTube, by the way, youtube.com/standupwithpete and standupwithpete.com anytime. You bumblebees at the end, I love you the most. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
For the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think your driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.